while. And then actually in the same tournament hall where Star City Games runs the Edison events for our Open.
So everything gonna come full circle.
Yeah, he is on your right. He is playing Rug Monsters. This is basically green-red monsters splashing blue for turn burn.
Yeah. Brian Lynch has been around a while, kind of known for his more aggressive bent. Likes to turn animals sideways, for sure.
So Lynch starting off the action here with a Sonic Ground into an Elvish Mystic. Nicholas Vea, his opponent, playing green-white aggro. Numerous times we had this deck on camera this weekend, starting off with a Force and Experiment 1.
Yeah, it's interesting that green-white has kind of had the presence that it has. Oh, I said that. It's actually not that popular here. We just kind of happened to have Adam Snook on camera twice, and then Nicholas Vea now. But green-white has a serious problem with mono-blue devotion, and that deck is everywhere in this tournament. So Nicholas looks like he has managed to avoid it thus far.
So Nicholas here with a turn 2 Call to Conclave. Brian at the end of the turn puts a Boon Sitter into play.
And has more Boon Satyrs where that came from, it looks like. Although I believe also has access to Xenagos the Reveler, so a couple of options here.
Interesting to see if Brian wants to offer up the trade here, and it looks like he does.
When in doubt, turn it sideways.
You can only go so wrong doing that.
Yeah. So some considerations there, but Nicholas also wants to turn his guys sideways, and you can't do that if they're not in play.
Also, a lot of pump spells potentially in Brian's deck as well, Rampager. So Nicholas just takes the 4 damage, and it looks like Brian post-combat is going to play Xenagos the Reveler, make a token, and ship the turn back to Nicholas.
So that Satyr token is only going to do so much work holding the ground here. Currently, it trades with Experiment 1, although I don't know if that will remain the case for long. Nope, doesn't look like.
Nicholas here with another copy of Experiment 1 and a Fleece Mane Lion.
So quite the curve from Nicholas, although not a bad curve from Brian either.
No, both players off to very good starts here. It looks like the 2 attackers sent over at Xenagos, and Brian's going to let Xenagos hit the graveyard.
No way to protect it from double incoming 3-powered creatures.
And Brian quickly plays a land and attacks with both his Satyr token and Boon Satyr.
So shoving that 2/2 into the open 3/3 is mighty suspicious.
Yeah. Something's up.
Right. And one has to assume that it is GWOR Clan Rampager, although Brian actually has access to some other tricks as well.
So it looks like it's just Experiment 1 in front of Boon Satyr. Brian's going to bestow a second Boon Satyr onto the Boon Satyr. Satyr comes across for 2.
Okay. So one rather hefty monster. That is an 8/4 Boon Satyr.
Yeah.
One of the really awkward things about the bestow creatures, this comes up for me all the time with Boon Satyr, is that if you just look at the board, that looks like two Boon Satyrs attacked.
It's awkward, yeah. Ideally, one would be tapped and one would be untapped.
Right. That is technically the correct way to represent the game state, because there was no reason for the enchantment one to be tapped. But a lot of people do it this way. Obviously, it's not a big deal.
So it looks like Nicholas just sends his creatures across for 9 points of damage post-combat. Banishing Light's going to get rid of one of the Boon Satyrs. Doesn't really matter which one.
Nope. And Brian down to 7, and kind of under the gun quickly. You know, Nicholas basically went 3/3 into 3/3 into 3/3 into 3/3.
Sometimes the games are that simple, especially with green-white aggro.
Yeah.
And Nicholas adds a post-combat Mutavault to his board.
Kind of discreetly adding an extra creature to the board at the very end of the turn there. And so Brian likely needs to kind of take a step back and figure out how to not die, although maybe not. He does have a clean window to attack here, so some combination of a GWOR Clan Rampager. He does have access to Flesh and Blood, although I believe just 1 copy. So that would close it out. And likely that's it. So doesn't have that, just sends 1 guy and leaves back with his blockers.
So we'll see what Brian has. I think his hand is just lands here, so.
Now, if you're Nicholas, you have to be suspicious of some things.
Well, what are you playing right now if you're in Nicholas's spot?
Well, having seen a Boon Satyr, like that's not a card that traditional green-red monsters plays. So you kind of have to, for one, you kind of have to assume there's another Boon Satyr, because that's a flash card that you know about. But I think you also have to worry about things like Lightning Strike.
Just a more aggressive tilt to the deck in general.
Yeah, you have to worry about removal and basically flash threats, of which there aren't actually that many in just green-red, which is, Brian has a slight touch of blue, but currently his mana base is only showing green-red. So given just those two colors, I think basically flash blockers and instant speed removal are on your radar. The most likely of which to me would be Lightning Strike.
So it looks like Nicholas, being cautious, as you suggested, is going to play conservatively here, sending in only Experiment 1, which Brian elects not to chump block.
And Brian finds Turn and Burn, which is actually just burn right now.
He has Mana Confluence
in
hand.
Okay, so there we go.
And this could potentially be very unexpected.
I would not see this coming. I didn't see it coming. I looked at the deck list earlier, and I was like, oh, is this? I had to double, triple check it.
Are you sure that's not a copy of Flesh Blood? That looks like
actually
a gold card to me.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, it definitely is. Equally unexpected, honestly, but. Okay.
So Brian just plays a land and says, go here. Nicholas with an end of turn advent is going to evolve Experiment 1 up to a 4/4.
Yeah. Yeah, we mentioned that Brian passed the turn with mana open, and there was some discussion, like what could that represent, because it wasn't clear. When a green-white aggro deck passes the turn before mana open, there's not that much mystery to it, honestly.
So it looks like we're seeing an attack here from Nicholas. Brian's going to figure out his chump blocks. That worm is lethal, the way things are currently.
So
yeah.
Just a casual decline to block the lethal 5/5.
Not a huge deal there. I think Brian's just dead there regardless. But in any case, Nicholas up a game here as we move on to the sideboards.
All right, so Nicholas is going to have access to, actually it looks like all sorts of fancy things. Nicholas is going to bring in, well, his sideboard is 3 Unflinching Courage, 2 Last Breath, 2 Tristani, Selesnya's Voice, 2 Banisher Priest, 3 Mistcutter Hydra, 1 Scion of Vitu-Ghazi, 1 Rootborn Defenses, and 1 Boon Satyr. Of those cards, I am eager to bring in Unflinching Courage, and I think given what Nicholas has seen, I want access to the extra Rootborn Defenses and likely the Scion of Vitu-Ghazi.
You're not interested in Tristani in this matchup?
I don't think so. Having said that, I don't particularly like Tristani in this archetype, but I think Tristani is more there for decks like mono black aggro, boss sly, things like that. You basically want it as a wall.
Yeah.
It's for matchups where you can't even afford to be aggressive with an Unflinching Courage.
Okay.
Like you need life gain that badly that like if you accidentally attack with a guy, you're probably going to die.
So on Brian's side of the sideboard here, he does have access to a couple blue cards here. Again, a blue splash return burn, 2 copies of Negate, along with 3 Sky Lasher, 4 Mizzium Mortar, 3 Nylea's Disciple, and a Mistcutter Hydra. I think you're not going to see too much beyond the mortars come in here.
Likely not. There is an argument for Nylea's Disciple. Not a strong one, but this green-white deck, it is an aggro deck. It's a deck that most of its threats actually trade with the Disciple rather than have to come up with some way around it. So it's not as good as it is against like Burning Tree Emissary decks, Rakdos Cackler decks, things like that. But I would not exactly be ashamed of it.
Sure. Interesting, you see so many sideboards nowadays that are like a lot of 1s and 2s. Brian's sort of giving away how long he's been playing Magic for. A lot more 4s and 3s in his sideboard. Much more definitive about the cards that he wants.
Sure. Yeah, well, and that's kind of, that's an extension of how kind of set in our ways this standard format has been. Largely, these are the same standard decks that we were playing with in October and November. So people have a lot of experience with them. If you've been playing green-white or red-green monster style decks all standard season long, then you've encountered most situations. You actually, you have your game plan for every matchup, you know what cards are good where, and that leaves you some wiggle room to sort of start fine-tuning with these 1-ofs and 2-ofs, kind of trickier choices like, the 1 Scion of Vitu-Ghazi, for example.
Sure. Brian here showing a lot of concessions for the mono blue devotion matchup. 3 Skylasher And Mistcutter Hydra is a lot more mono blue stuff than we typically see.
Well, and of course, Mistcutter Hydra kind of double dips.
Yeah.
It's honestly not even that good against mono blue devotion. That feels weird to say because, you know, obviously a protection from blue hasty fireball guy sounds really good on paper. But mono blue can be very tempo oriented in this matchup. It kind of doesn't really give you the time to cast it.
Yeah, you may not be really in the market for a large attacker.
Right.
But Skylasher gives you a blocker, and then you can sort of set up your better stuff.
Yes, Skylasher very, very good in that matchup. And then Mistcutter, just good. But Mistcutter, of course, is very, very good against Sphinx's Revelation decks.
Yeah.
Whereas Skylasher, not that exciting there. Skylasher was a lot better when people were still playing Detention Sphere.
Sure, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, when you got to dodge, of course, counterspells, but also Azorius Charm and Detention Sphere, then it was a more reasonable threat to lean on. The big problem is that even if you could sneak it past all the removal, just a 2/2 body is really unimpressive against Jace.
And Elspeth just doesn't line up very well against other cards in the deck.
Yeah, the Planeswalkers that the control deck generally has to jam into play in order to win the game at some point anyway. You kind of have to assume you're going to have to face those Planeswalkers, and Skylasher basically does nothing against either of them.
Really hard to find threats that are good against every angle of attack in their deck, though.
Yeah.
So game 2 almost underway here. Brian will be on the play.
So Brian's deck obviously wants to be on the play. These are two very tempo-oriented decks. And Brian wants to see mana acceleration foremost, and actually it looks like he is going to kick off with Elvish Mystic.
It's a good start here. Yeah, Brian's list a lot more tempo-oriented. 3 copies of Fanatic of Xenagos on top of the typical 3 drops that you see in this list.
Yeah, that was of course, it's the very first card written on his deck list. When I first pulled the deck list, I was like, oh, we're getting aggressive. This is cool. Of course, the deck turns out to be a kind of a more mid-range monsters deck, but yeah, Fanatic of Xenagos, not a card that sees a ton of play in the standard format, although the rate's really good.
Yeah, it's hard to go too wrong with that card.
It's basically, it's either a Lockstone Smiter immediately or a Lockstone Smiter permanently.
And how has he made a room for this card, or for these different cards? No copies of Domri in his list.
Does he have Courser of Krufix? I believe he has.
He does.
He does have those. Okay.
So much more aggressive take on the deck.
Yeah. Domri is a card that actually I would think comes out in a lot of matchups, actually. It is very good against control, but actually pretty bad against everything else, I think.
So Brian here attacks. Nicholas elects not to block. Brian just says take 2, and post-combat adds Palikronos to the board.
Yeah, and this is the start Brian wanted, just curving out mana guy into threat, into bigger threat. Nicholas looking for, I think, a Selesnya charm there, but doesn't find it, can just commit more creatures to the board.
So Brian's draw continues to be excellent here on the 4th turn of the game, a land and a Stormbreath Dragon.
Yep, so Stormbreath Dragon is very difficult to answer for these green-white decks. You basically can attack into it with a 5/5 worm. That's more or less it. Actually getting it off the board, pretty much impossible.
So it looks like Nicholas has gone to the Shastani plan post-board here. Cast it on the 4th turn.
Yep, so he likes it here, and as I was saying, I don't particularly care for the card here, and it doesn't look like it's doing much in this matchup, or in this game, rather.
Well, it might if he's able to start making some 3/3s, gain some life. Could be a thing.
I mean, it will help, sure. It doesn't solve the Stormbreath problem, and I think that the Stormbreath problem is more pressing. It's pressing enough that Nicholas just doesn't have time to get that going.
So it looks like Brian's going to start off the turn here by just getting into combat here, attacks with the Stormbreath Dragon, which is unblockable, and the Palikronos, and now Nicholas debating if he wants to block.
Yeah, so a block here invites Brian to monstrous his Palikronos. Basically, any kind of double block likely results in Brian eating all of Nicholas's creatures, I believe. Or is he can only do it for 2, I think. So can't actually monstrous eat a 1/3/3, and then the other 2 that blocked would fall as well. So just looking for a pure and simple 2-for-1 here.
So it looks like Nicholas says no thank you to any of those blocks. Look pretty unattractive. Just going to take it all and fall to 5.
And the old post-combat fanatic of Xenagos. There's something you don't see very often. But
I have a feeling how this one's going to be settled here.
yeah, Xenagos says, yeah, that one can stay a 3/3. Of course, yeah, that looks weird, but Brian, yeah, obviously, if he can't tap his lands before he attacks, or else the blue Chronos attack doesn't work.
Yeah, just looks awkward.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Looks awkward, but it definitely made sense. Even if Fanatic of Xenagos had been a 4/4, it wouldn't have helped much against Tristani.
So Nicholas now with a 5th land. Tristani is online. Token is in play.
And so Nicholas can cast Experiment 1, activate Tristani, make a 3/3. That he would gain 4 in that exchange. That still puts him dead to Stormbreath Dragon.
He can also pass and just put the ball into Brian's court, as he has the option of going monstrous with the Fleece Main line and 2 to give himself a good blocker. So a lot of options here.
Okay.
Looks like Nicholas is going to start things off by casting a Fleece Main line, triggers Tristani, goes up to 8.
Okay, so you can gain 6 this way, which that will work out a little bit better for him.
And sends in an attack.
Yeah. Much like Brian last game, it's like you're not going to get anywhere by sitting still.
Do you think this is a Rootborn Defenses attack?
It could be, but it doesn't have to be. This is... I think even if you have nothing, this is a fine attack. Rootborn Defenses would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like I believe I did catch it there in his hand.
So we see Fanatic block here, and it looks like... Is Nicholas going to fight over this?
Looks like... Well, okay. He kind of picked it up, looked like he was moving it towards the graveyard, and then thought better of it, and then thought better of it.
Yep, so it looks like there's just a trade there, and Brian's going to take the hit from the Centaur.
So, going to pass the turn with 3 mana up. That is enough to activate Tristani, put another Centaur into play, and go up to 11. Which I believe keeps him alive, at least for a turn.
So Brian again going to make an aggressive attack here, sends in everything but the mana creature. 7 mana at the ready, enough to monstrous Stormbreath Dragon.
And Nicholas goes for Rootborn Defenses. Brian could respond by monstrosing Pelucranos to eat the token.
It's pretty attractive here, prevents some life gain.
Yeah, I think I'm happy with that play if I'm Brian.
Looks like that's exactly what's going to happen here. Pelucranos goes monstrous, takes care of the token. Rootborn Defenses resolves, nothing to populate, and Nicholas is going to pack him up.
Okay. Of course, that Fleeceman Lion was indestructible that turn, so it actually could have jumped in front of the Pelucranos.
There was some blocking to be done,
Yeah.
right? But it looks like Nicholas, board collapses, the Stormbreath Dragon's still in play.
Yep.
Just going to let that game go.
Yep. Yeah, and as I was saying, Tristani, if you let it get into play and give it some turns to go to work, yeah, it'll eventually take over the game. But I don't think Brian intends to allow you to do that.
Yeah. So you're going to be going to game 3 here. You can see Brian going through his sideboard now. Looks like Xenagos, the Reveler, in the sideboard right now, taking out for this matchup. Makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
2/2s are not very good against 3/3s.
Nope. Yeah, Xenagos, pretty shady here. I would think that Brian actually has more to take out than he has to bring in. Honestly, Boon Satyr is not great against 3/3s either. And
Still seems like having the option for a pump spell is valuable the way some of these games play out.
that is true. Are there any Mizium Mortars in this list? Main
There
or
are
side?
4 in the sideboard.
There we go.
We have
Okay.
to assume those are in.
Yeah, I didn't see any in the main, so I was like, we gotta have some on the board, right? Yeah, the full 4. Not messing around there.
So Brian dealing with a very different build here. This is a red-green monsters list. Even setting aside the fact that there's a blue splash instead of a black splash or no
Yeah.
splash at all, a lot of his individual card choices are much different. 0 copies of Domri is just something we don't really see.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that he's basically kind of showing his preferences. Brian's is known for playing aggro decks. He's been around since Iron Claw works, basically. He's been at it for a long time. And Domri Raid is a powerful card, but it's a card that ekes out extras. It is not a card that does a lot of attacking or does a lot of pressuring.
Yeah.
So basically, he's just replaced Domri with Fanatic of Xenagos, and
The removal spells have been turned into turn burns.
Yes.
Effectively.
which that's an interesting call as well. I'm trying to think of what all Turn and Burn does in this format. It's a solution to Desecration Demon, which is traditionally a problem for green-red monsters decks, particularly ones that don't have. Wait, sorry. I was going to say particularly ones that don't have Xenagos. He does have Xenagos, so.
Opposite that is a card it answers, which is traditionally troublesome for monsters lists.
Yep. So deals with some of the scarier kind of black devotion threats. It is pretty reasonable in mirrors. It's good against other Pelucrinoses and Stormbreath Dragons, things of that nature.
Not shabby against Master of Waves.
No. Yeah, that's true. You can actually, if you just turn Master of Waves, then it no longer has the ability that pumps the elementals.
Correct.
So you'll just get, you can, even if you can't get it into combat, it will still remove all the elementals. So actually, yeah, quite good there.
No, it doesn't always kill it outright, but it's at least productive in most spots against that card.
It doesn't kill it, but we'll kill all of the elementals unless there is a Hall of Triumph or another Master Waves, at which point the game was probably out of reach anyway. Let's be real.
So for those of you just joining us, round 9 here of the Standard Open here in Worcester, Massachusetts, Patrick Sullivan, Andrew Shrout. These players, Brian Lynch and Nicholas Vea, at 7-1 here. Since we got to 460 some odd players, that's kind of on the low end of 10 rounds. So a win here will likely lock one of these players up for the elimination rounds.
Yeah, these players playing for top 8. A lot of well-known players actually playing for top 8. We've got Mike Segrist, Matt Costa playing for top 8. We've got Ross Merriam playing for top 8.
Gerard Fabiano
playing
Reed
for
Duke
top 8.
has already locked up a spot. It's going to potentially be a very, very good top 8.
Yep. And I mentioned last round, actually, Reed Duke, his conversion rate is absurd on the Star City Open Series.
Like opens enter to opens top 8'd?
Yes. No. Opens top 8'd, opens 1. He
Okay.
has top 8'd, he has 7 Open Series top 8s, and of those 7, he won 5 of them.
That is insane.
Yeah. 4,
that is insane.
Yeah, 4 Legacy Open wins. That is 1 with Reanimator, 1 with Elves, and 2 with Natural Order Rug.
Okay.
So a little throwback there. And then the Team Sealed Open win alongside Huey and Owen.
That is crazy. I would be really interested to see what his ratio is of opens entered versus opens top 8'd.
I'd imagine that has got to be one of the highest.
Do you think it's north of? Do you think it's possibly north of 40%?
Very possible, actually. He travels some for opens, but not a ton. He doesn't really leave the kind of northeastern corridor. I know one of his wins was in Philadelphia. One of his wins was in Indy, but that was tied to an invitational.
Yeah.
So other than 4 invitationals, generally he's not going like south of Pennsylvania, I don't think.
Right.
Now, to be fair, we run a lot of opens in this region, so he certainly played a few. I know that there have been opens that Reed hasn't top 8'd. I can't name any offhand, but.
So game 3 underway here. Nicholas starts off with a Forest and Experiment 1. Brian with a Forest and an Elvish Mystic. And there's Call the Conclave. That's going to evolve Experiment 1. Nicholas off to a very good start again.
Yep, exactly what Nicholas wants to do. Experiment 1, the card you want to open with in this matchup, because you have so many ways to turn it into a 3/3 by turn 3. And Brian does not have a ton of ways to kill it, other than, of course, the Mizium Mortars, which are stretched pretty thin here.
Yep. So it looks like Nicholas here with a Smiter pre-combat here to pump the Experiment 1. Brian with Boon Satyr. See what he wants to block here.
And this is, again, basically the perfect curve for Nicholas. Boon Satyr is going to do its best Pitfall Trap impression.
So that's going to trade with the Centaur here. Experiment 1 comes across for 3 points of damage.
Getting your Experiment 1 to 3/3 is a pretty big deal in this matchup. A lot of times, the matchup is hinged on whether or not the monster's player can overload a Mizium Mortars in time. And having a creature on board that will survive through that is a very big deal.
So it looks like Nicholas is going to start the tier with a Banishing Priest targeting the Scavenging Ooze. Brian's going to respawn and exile the Boon Satyr to gain 1 life. Critically, probably indicates he doesn't have a removal spell in hand right now.
Yeah, Nicholas had an option there to get rid of the Elvish Mystic to kind of keep Brian off of Mizium Mortar's mana. Again, I think that's one of the ways that Brian comes back from this is just getting to 5 and 6 mana and playing big, scary effects I don't necessarily think that Gore Clan Rampager counts.
No, it does not. Brian here is going to offer up the trade, or try to block this experiment one rather. Nicholas with the Selesnya Charm that's going to trample over for 1 point of damage. The Smiter comes across uncontested. And Brian falls to 4. This could be a more overloaded mortars, though.
Pound's looking for it. Oh, finds it.
Mortars off the top.
Nice.
Pulsalanda overloaded. That's going to kill everything that Nicholas has. The Experiment 1 can regenerate, but that critically also unlocks the Scavenging Ooze.
Yeah, that was a pretty healthy turnaround. Now, Nicholas's hand's pretty good. Nicholas has access to an Advent of the Worm, a Boon Satyr. Currently can't cast the Advent of the Worm, but those are lurking in the wings. And it looks like Brian is going to offer the trade there. Well, ostensibly it is not a trade. It's just blocking a 1/1 with a 2/2. I think Brian has to assume that if Nicholas is attacking, he has either Selesnya Charm to pump or a flash threat of some kind.
So now we're back to Nicholas's turn here. Brian with just a land, and now Brian's going to block with the Elvish Mystic and play a Boon Satyr of his own to eat the Boon Satyr.
So kind of a backdoor way to trade Elvish Mystic for a Boon Satyr. Now Nicholas hits his 4th land and passes. Again, there is no mystery to what that represents. Now Brian has the Storm Breath, but can't afford to attack with it.
Yeah, he senses that Advent of the Worm is the card left over in Nicholas's hand here.
Was that an Unflinching Courage off of it? No, okay, sorry.
And wisely holds back to double block. There's a trade. The Worm for Stormbreath Dragon. Brian's still staying at 4 here. There's an Experiment 1 and a Mutavault.
Okay, now this spot, it's a little fuzzier. You might start to think, okay, maybe he doesn't have another one, but even if you do think that, there's not a reason to really get aggressive here anyway. So just the same, Advent of the Worm does what Advent of the Worm does best, which is jump out and kill opponents.
Yep. So Brian killed by the second copy of Advent of the Worm there. Nicholas Vea 2 games to 1. He will likely be in a position to draw next round for Brian. A good run here. One of the old school, as you mentioned, stalwarts of the New England scene. 2 Grand Prix top 8s scattered amongst his career. A bunch of Pro Tours that he's played in, but will not be playing later this evening or Sunday morning.
Nope. We'll have to settle for a top 16 or top 32 finish.
So we're going to be seeing momentarily if we have another match for you, but for the meantime, we're going to be coming back to the booth here.